Good evening, everyone. It's so wonderful to see this room filled with human beings that we all love. So on behalf of Columbia Global Centers Paris, the Institute for Ideas and Imagination, and all of us at Reid Hall, I'm delighted to welcome you to the celebration of this newly restored Grande Salle Ginsberg-LeClerc. Salute his steadfast and substantial support throughout his 2 decades at the helm of Columbia University. His leadership has helped us transform Reid Hall into a vibrant and magnetic center for teaching, research, and public engagement. Tonight, we are honored by the presence of Denise Campbell Bauer, an U.S. Ambassador to France, Rosberg, Senior Executive Vice President of Columbia University, and Wafa El Sad, Executive Vice President of Columbia Global. We also welcome the directors of Columbia's other global centers, and they are here in this room. Thank you for coming. And the many friends of Reid Hall who have come from different parts of the world to mark this very important occasion. The room in which we are gathered was designed in 1911 by the French-American architect Charlie Knight and financed by Elizabeth Mills Reid, philanthropist and spouse of Whitelaw Reid, himself ambassador to France from 1889 to 1892. Reid had acquired this property in 1892 in order to cater to the needs of the scores of American women who had come to Paris to cultivate their artistic talents. More than a simple boarding house, 4 Rue de Chevreuse was transformed into a club where women could live, work, and showcase their accomplishments. The addition of this room to the club was most dear to Reid, who envisaged a convivial space for meetings, exhibitions, and performances. Over the years, this room has more than satisfied Reid's aspirations. It has witnessed the passage of numerous illustrious figures in French-American relations and has been the stage for countless ceremonies, conferences, workshops, dances, concerts, exhibits, and parties. Today, it is the very cornerstone of the numerous activities in which we are all engaged at Reid Hall. This storied space has not only been restored in the spirit of its original beauty, but it has been completely modernized from floor to ceiling. Its remarkable rebirth would never have come to pass without the vision and generosity of 2 of the very best friends Reid Hall has had in recent times. Guess who? Judith Ginsberg and Paul LeClerc. Please stand. Please stand. Yes, stand. No, okay. As most of you are aware, Paul is the former director of the Paris Center until 2021. Judith and Paul's beneficence was complemented by significant gifts made by Merritt and Tom Glosser, Laura and Jerry Rosberg, and Amelia Alverson. They all deserve our appreciation and, of course, our applause. So, thank you. We are also greatly indebted to our exceptional architect, Mathieu. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Mathieu Gillet of the firm Perrault and Richard, all of whom are represented here. Mathieu, please stand. His intelligence, taste, and skill are evident in every square millimeter of this room, equally as evident in his lovely essay written for tonight's program. We'd also like to recognize the numerous entrepreneurs who worked assiduously over the past 18 months to reconstruct the glass roof and ceiling, overhaul the electrical systems, lighting, flooring, audiovisual equipment, and HVAC, which, as you can see, is still in progress. A special show of gratitude to the Patagonia team led by Pascual Cortés for its meticulous work on the wood, paneling, the friezes, and the walls. Without their incessant labor, the room and vestibule would never have been completed by today. And finally, I'd like to personally commend the Reid Hall Paris Center, the Reid Hall staff, and the Institute staff, our maintenance, finance, and programming teams, and our operations manager, Krista Foree, for supporting this effort through thick and thin. Apologies to them all for the noise, the dust, and the smells. As you look at tonight's program, which was beautifully designed by Anastasia Comneau, the designer who has worked with us for several years now, you will note that it is divided into two distinct parts. The first, including an essay by Thierry Grillet, brings to life transformations in artistic expression that took place here in Paris and in this neighborhood during the first 2 decades of the 20th century. And now I lost my page. The second, including an essay by Mark Mazauer, showcases artistic creation by former fellows of the Columbia Institute for Ideas and Imagination, established at Reid Hall in 2018. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Wafa El Sadr, our new leader on New York's campus. She will speak on her behalf and that of Columbia President Lee Bollinger. Thank you all.
It's wonderful to be finally here and to actually inaugurate this remarkable salle, this remarkable room, and particularly to honor Judith Ginsberg and Paul LeClerc for your vision and your determination in making this happen. And I want to welcome all of you here as well to this remarkable location here in Paris that's very dear to Columbia University, and it's one of our 11 Columbia Global Centers situated all over the world. I want to ask the Global Center directors who are with us here to stand up as well. So, stand up. Great. We have, yeah, I know. We have Paris, Brune. We have Tunis with Youssef. We have Hania, Amman. Then we have Tom from Santiago and Rio de Janeiro, and we have Helena from Beijing. We also have Ipek with us, who's from the Istanbul Global Center. So it's really great to be here. I'm really particularly honored, of course, to share with you this following message from President Lee C. Bollinger on this event. Unfortunately, he's unable to join us today, but he did share with me this message. So I'm going to be reading it to you. I started visiting here before I became president of Columbia 21 years ago. It's a place where my wife Jean and I traveled to, a place where we have always felt at once inspired and at home. So it's particularly fitting that my last public event as president should be back here in Paris for this wonderful occasion. This is truly a magical place. Located in the heart of Paris in Montparnasse, with roots that stretch back into the 18th century, this space is a bustling hub of vibrant intellectual activity where undergraduates and graduate students, faculty, staff, and alumni, as well as visitors, gather to study, to discuss, to engage, and to perform. A decade ago, when it became the Columbia Global Center in Paris, part of a network of now 11 global centers around the world, then Director Paul LeClerc was committed to achieve a series of very ambitious tasks here in Paris. These included sustaining the existing student and faculty academic opportunities and other programming, increase student enrollments, create a robust roster of public programming, and elevating the physical infrastructure of the buildings right here around us. Paul, Brune, and as well as with Judith also, and the current Global Center Director here in Paris, and Mark Mazauer, I don't see him, but where's Mark? Oh, there you are. You're supposed to be here, Mark. I was looking for you. Come up front. There's a seat for you up here. And Mark Mazauer, as well as the Columbia University leadership, among others, worked on achieving these aspirations. And the results have included the expansion of teaching and learning opportunities for students and faculty, expansion of public events that have captured large and distinguished audiences, including our ambassador. Thank you. As well as, of course, gaining the attention of and engagement of the Columbia alumni here in Paris, in France, and in other countries around France as well. And also the complete renovation of the buildings and upgrading of facilities, making this place an even more beautiful haven in this stunning city. And the last piece of this effort has been the Grande Salle. As most of you are probably aware, the COVID-19 pandemic threw a wrench into the proceedings and forcing Paul and his team to reassess how to approach this work. It was truly gratifying when Judith and Paul decided to generously provide much of the funding for this renovation themselves. Their decision inspired others who are proud Colombians, led by Amelia Alverson, Marit and Tom Glosser, and Laura and Jerry Rosberg, to offer their own generous donations. Thank you all very much. At the end result is right here for all to see, a Grande Salle spectacularly restored to recapture the spirit of the early 20th century, but with a modern sensibility and flair. I know that Judith and Paul are thrilled with the outcome, a fitting capstone to Paul's incredible service to Columbia University. Jean and I are very pleased and proud to call them our friends and to share in this moment with all of you as we look ahead with great anticipation to the next chapter in our lives. On behalf of the entire university, please join me in congratulating Judith and Paul and everyone who made all of this possible. Thank you. And just to end, I want to also, of course, again, acknowledge Brune and her team who've worked tirelessly. I've been coming to this Global Center for many, many years, and this salle has always been kind of a mystery, work in progress, and it's amazing to finally be able to come here and to sit here and to witness this transformation. So thank you all very much for all your support. Thank you.
Il y avait déjà bien des années que de Combray, tout ce qui n'était pas le théâtre et le drame de mon coucher n'existait plus pour moi, quand, un jour d'hiver, comme je rentrais à la maison, ma mère, voyant que j'avais froid, me proposa de me faire prendre contre mon habitude un peu de thé. Je refusai d'abord, et je ne sais pourquoi. C'est fort, non? Non. Je refusai d'abord, et je ne sais pourquoi, me ravisai. Elle envoya chercher un de ces gâteaux courts et dodus appelés Petite Madeleine, qui semblent avoir été moulés dans la valve rainurée d'une coquille de Saint-Jacques. Et bientôt, machinalement, accablé par la morne journée, la perspective d'un triste lendemain, je portai à mes lèvres une cuillerée du thé où j'avais laissé s'amollir un morceau de madeleine. Mais à l'instant même où la gorgée mêlée de miettes de gâteau toucha mon palais, je tressaillis, attentif à ce qui se passait d'extraordinaire en moi. Un plaisir délicieux m'avait envahi, isolé, sans la notion de sa cause. Il m'avait aussitôt rendu les vicissitudes de la vie indifférentes, ses désastres inoffensifs, sa brièveté illusoire, de la même façon qu'opère l'amour, en me remplissant d'une essence précieuse, ou plutôt, cette essence n'était pas en moi, elle était moi. J'avais cessé de me sentir médiocre, contingent, mortel. D'où avait pu me venir cette puissante joie? Je sentais qu'elle était liée au goût du thé et du gâteau, mais qu'elle le dépassait infiniment, ne devait pas être de même nature. D'où venait-elle? Que signifiait-elle? Où l'appréhender? Je bois une seconde gorgée, où je ne trouve rien de plus que dans la première. Une troisième, qui m'apporte un peu moins que la seconde. Il est temps que je m'arrête, la vertu du breuvage semble diminuer. Il est clair que la vérité que je cherche n'est pas en lui, mais en moi. Il l'y a éveillée, mais ne la connaît pas et ne peut que répéter indéfiniment, avec de moins en moins de force, ce même témoignage que je ne sais pas interpréter et que je veux au moins pouvoir lui redemander et retrouver intact à ma disposition tout à l'heure pour un éclaircissement décisif. Je pose la tasse et me tourne vers mon esprit. C'est à lui de trouver la vérité. Mais comment? Grave incertitude, toutes les fois que l'esprit se sent dépassé par lui-même, quand lui, le chercheur, est tout ensemble le pays obscur où il doit chercher et où tout son bagage ne lui sera de rien. Chercher, pas seulement. Créer. Il est en face de quelque chose qui n'est pas encore et que seul il peut réaliser, puis faire entrer dans sa lumière. Et je recommence à me demander quel pouvait être cet état inconnu qui n'apportait aucune preuve logique, mais l'évidence de sa félicité, de sa réalité devant laquelle les autres s'évanouissaient. Je veux essayer de le faire réapparaître. Je rétrograde par la pensée au moment où je pris la première cuillerée de thé. Je retrouve le même état sans une clarté nouvelle. Je demande à mon esprit un effort de plus, de ramener encore une fois la sensation qui s'enfuit. Et pour que rien ne brise l'élan dont il va tâcher de la ressaisir, j'écarte tout obstacle, toute idée étrangère. J'abrite mes oreilles et mon attention contre les bruits de la chambre voisine. Mais sentant mon esprit qui se fatigue sans réussir, je le force au contraire à prendre cette distraction que je lui refusais, à penser à autre chose, à se refaire avant une tentative suprême. Puis une deuxième fois, je fais le vide devant lui, je remets en face de lui la saveur encore récente de cette première gorgée et je sens tressaillir en moi quelque chose qui se déplace, voudrait s'élever, quelque chose qu'on aurait désancré, à une grande profondeur. Je ne sais ce que c'est, mais cela monte lentement. J'éprouve la résistance et j'entends la rumeur des distances traversées. Certes, ce qui palpite ainsi au fond de moi, ce doit être l'image, le souvenir visuel qui, lié à cette saveur, tente de la suivre jusqu'à moi. Mais il se débat trop loin, trop confusément, à peine si je perçois le reflet neutre où se confond l'insaisissable tourbillon des couleurs remuées. Mais je ne peux distinguer la forme, lui demander, comme au seul interprète possible, de me traduire le témoignage de sa contemporaine, de son inséparable compagne. La saveur, lui demander de m'apprendre de quelles circonstances particulières, de quelle époque du passé il s'agit. Arrivera-t-il jusqu'à la surface de ma claire conscience, ce souvenir, l'instant ancien que l'attraction d'un instant identique est venue de si loin solliciter, émouvoir, soulever tout au fond de moi? Je ne sais. Maintenant, je ne sens plus rien. Il est arrêté, redescendu peut-être. Qui sait s'il remontera jamais de sa nuit? 10 fois, il me faut recommencer, me pencher vers lui, et chaque fois, la lâcheté qui nous détourne de toute tâche difficile, de toute œuvre importante, m'a conseillé de laisser cela, de boire mon thé, en pensant simplement à mes ennuis d'aujourd'hui, à mes désirs de demain qui se laissent remâcher sans peine. Et tout d'un coup, le souvenir m'est apparu. Ce goût, c'était celui du petit morceau de madeleine que le dimanche matin, à Combray, parce que ce jour-là, je ne sortais pas avant l'heure de la messe, quand j'allais lui dire bonjour dans sa chambre, ma tante Léonie m'offrait après l'avoir trempé dans son infusion de thé ou de tilleul. La vue de la petite Madeleine ne m'avait rien rappelé avant que je n'y eusse goûté. Peut-être parce que, en ayant souvent aperçu depuis, sans en manger, sur les tablettes des pâtisseries, leur image avait quitté ces jours de Combray pour se lier à d'autres plus récents. Peut-être parce que, de ces souvenirs abandonnés si longtemps hors de la mémoire, rien ne survivait, tout s'était désagrégé, les formes, et celles aussi du petit coquillage de pâtisserie si grassement sensuel sous son plissage sévère et dévot, s'étaient abolies, ou ensommeillées, avaient perdu la force d'expansion qui leur eût permis de rejoindre la conscience. Mais, quand d'un passé ancien rien ne subsiste, après la mort des êtres, après la destruction des choses, seule, plus frêle mais plus vivace, plus immatérielle, plus persistante, plus fidèle, l'odeur et la saveur restent encore longtemps comme des âmes à se rappeler, à attendre, à espérer, sur la ruine de tout le reste, à porter sans fléchir sur leurs gouttelettes presque impalpables l'édifice immense du souvenir. Et dès que je reconnus le goût du morceau de madeleine trempé dans le tilleul que me donnait ma tante, quoique je ne susse pas encore et dusse remettre à bien plus tard de découvrir pourquoi ce souvenir me rendait si heureux, aussitôt la vieille maison grise sur la rue où était sa chambre vint comme un décor de théâtre s'appliquer au petit pavillon donnant sur le jardin qu'on avait construit pour mes parents, sur ses derrières, ce pan tronqué que seul j'avais revu jusque-là. Et avec la maison, la ville, depuis le matin jusqu'au soir et par tous les temps, la place où on m'envoyait avant le déjeuner, les rues où j'allais faire des courses, les chemins qu'on prenait si le temps était beau. Et comme dans ce jeu où les Japonais s'amusent à tremper dans un bol de porcelaine rempli d'eau de petits morceaux de papier, jusque-là indistincts, qui à peine y sont-ils plongés, s'étirent, se contournent, se colorent, se différencient, deviennent des fleurs, des maisons, des personnages consistants et reconnaissables. De même, maintenant, toutes les fleurs de notre jardin et celles du parc de Monsieur Swann et les nymphéas de la Vivonne et les bonnes gens du village et leurs petits logis et l'église et tout Combray et ses environs, tout cela qui prend forme et solidité est sorti, ville et jardin, de ma tasse de thé. Pardonnez-moi mon ignorance. Pardonnez-moi de ne plus connaître l'ancien jeu des vers. Je ne sais plus rien et j'aime uniquement. Les fleurs à mes yeux redeviennent des flammes. Je médite divinement et je souris des êtres que je n'ai pas créés. Mais si le temps venait où l'ombre, enfin solide, se multipliait en réalisant la diversité formelle de mon amour, j'admirerais mon ouvrage. Sous le pont Mirabeau coule la Seine. Et nos amours, faut-il qu'ils m'en souviennent? La joie venait toujours après la peine. Vienne la nuit, sonne l'heure, les jours s'en vont. Je demeure. Les mains dans les mains, restons face à face, tandis que sous le pont de nos bras passent des éternels regards, l'ombre s'y lasse. Vienne la nuit, sonne l'heure, les jours s'en vont. Je demeure. L'amour s'en va comme cette eau courante. L'amour s'en va comme la vie est lente et comme l'espérance est violente. Vienne la nuit, sonne l'heure, les jours s'en vont. Je demeure. Passent les jours, passent les semaines, ni temps passé, ni les amours reviennent. Sous le pont Mirabeau coule la Seine. Vienne la nuit, sonne l'heure, les jours s'en vont, je demeure. Tu n'as pas surpris mon secret. Déjà le cortège s'avance, mais il nous reste le regret de n'être pas de connivence. La rose flotte au fil de l'eau, les masques ont passé par bord. Il tremble en moi comme un sanglot, ce lourd secret que tu quémandes.
portrait that I'm reading now is one of Matisse. It was written many years ago when I first knew it. Matisse. One was quite certain that for a long part of his being living, he had been trying to be certain that he was wrong in doing what he was doing. And then when he could not come to be certain that he had been wrong in doing what he had been doing, when he had completely convinced himself that he would not come to be certain that he had been wrong in doing what he had been doing, he was really certain then that he was a great one, and he certainly was a great one. Certainly, everyone could be certain of this thing, that this one is a great one. This one was one very many were knowing, some, and very many were glad to meet him. Very many sometimes listened to him. Some listened to him very often. There were some who listened to him, and he talked then, and he told them then that certainly he had been one suffering, and he was then, being one, trying to be certain that he was wrong in doing what he was doing, and he had come then to be certain that he never would be certain that he was doing what was wrong for him to be doing then. And he was suffering then, and he was certain that he would be one doing what he was doing, and he was certain that he should be one doing what he was doing, and he was certain that he would always be one suffering. And this then made him certain, that he would always be one being suffering, this made him certain that he was expressing something being struggling. And certainly very many were quite certain that he was greatly expressing something being struggling. This one was knowing some who were listening to him, and he was telling very often about being one suffering. And this was not a dreary thing to anyone hearing that then. It was not a saddening thing to anyone hearing it again and again. To some it was quite an interesting thing, hearing it again and again. To some it was an exciting thing, hearing it again and again. Some knowing this one and being certain that this one was a great one, and that was one clearly expressing something, were ones hearing this one telling about being one being living, were hearing this one telling this thing again and again. Some who were ones knowing this one, and were once certain that this one was one who was clearly telling something, was a great man, were not listening very often to this one telling and again about being one being living. Certainly some who were certain that this one was a great man, and one clearly expressing something, and greatly expressing something being struggling, were listening to this one telling about being living, telling about this again and again and again. Certainly very many knowing this one, and being certain that this one was a great man, and that this one was clearly telling something, were not listening to this one telling about being living, were not listening to this one telling this again and again. If I told him a completed portrait of Picasso, if I told him, would he like it? Would he like it if I told him? Would he like it? Would Napoleon? Would Napoleon? Would he like it? If Napoleon, if I told him, if Napoleon, would he like it if I told him? If I told him, if Napoleon. Would he like it if Napoleon, if I told him? If I told him, if Napoleon, if I told him. If I told him, would he like it? Would he like it if I told him? Now, not now, and now. Exactly as king, feeling full for it. Exactitude as king. So to beseech you as full as for it. Exactly or as king. Shutters shut and open, so do queens. Shutters shut, shutters. And so shutters shut, and shutters, and so shutters, and so shutters shut, and so shutters shut, and shutters, and so. And so shutters shut, and so, and also. And also, and so, and so, and also. Exact resemblance, to exact resemblance. The exact resemblance, as exact as a resemblance. Exactly as resembling, exactly resembling. Exactly in resemblance. Exactly as resemblance, exactly and resemblance. For this is so because now actively repeat it all. Now actively repeat it all. Now actively repeat at all. Have, hold, and hear, actively repeat it all. I judge as a resemblance to him. Who comes first? Napoleon the First. Who comes to? Coming to. Who goes there? As they go, they share. Who shares all? All is as all, as yet, or as yet. Now to date, now to date. Now, and date, and the date. Who came first? Napoleon the First. Who came first? Napoleon the First. Who came first? Napoleon first. Presently, exactly do they do. First exactly. Exactly do they do too. First exactly, and first exactly. Exactly do they do, and first exactly and exactly. And do they do at first exactly and first exactly, and do they do the first exactly. And do they do the first exactly at first exactly. First as exactly, and first as exactly. Presently as presently and as presently. He, and 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 as he, and as he, and he. He is, and as he is, and as he is, and he is. He is, and as he, and as he is, and he, and he, and he, and he. Can curls rob, can curls quote, quotable, as presently, as exactly do, as trains, has trains, as trains, presently proportions, presently, as proportions is presently, father and father, was the king or room, father and whether, was there, what was there, there was there, whether and in there, as even say so, one island, two island, three the land, three the land, two island, one island, two island, as a so they cannot, a note they cannot, afloat they cannot, they dote they cannot, they as denote miracles play fairly well, as presently. Let me recite what history teaches. These records were made by me, Gertrude Stein, at Columbia University, January 30th, 1935.
Okay, so I'm going to read a few passages in English of local artists from the 1920s. The first one is of a local artist, eccentric type, kind of crazy, but very cool crazy, Kiki de Montparnasse from 1929. It's called Montparnasse Today. Here I am, back in Montparnasse, which to me is the land of liberty. As I see it, I can cut up all I want to here without being afraid of having to go eat beans again. Folks here are broad-minded, and what would be a crime anywhere else is simply a little false pass. Montparnasse, so picturesque, so colorful. All the peoples of the earth have come here to pitch their tents, and yet it's all just like one big family. In the morning, you can see young fellows in wide trousers and fresh-cheeked young girls on their way to art schools, to Watteau's, to Couleur Rossi's, to the Grande Chaumière, etc. Later, the cafe terraces begin to fill up, and pretty Americans eating oatmeal can be seen sitting side by side the French piquant citron. The crowd goes to look for a ray of sunlight at the cafes. The models meet one another there. They're true to their trade. Aisha, Bouboule, Clara. There are few as nice as they left anymore. In the evening, I meet my little playmates once more. Fujita and the pretty Yuki, Derin, who laughs at his own stories, Kissling with his Tom Mix shirts, and his wife, who has the gayest laugh in Paris. There's Desnos, who is all fussed up because a number of persons have asked him to do something for them. That gives the impression that he's a fast liver. There's Man Ray, who always seems to be looking into little pieces of glass or else dreaming about some newfangled sort of photographic apparatus. There's Lucy and there's Pasquin, with his derby sinking further and further down over his ear. There are people who have got off by accident at the Vingt subway station and who have never left the district again, have stayed there all their lives. To make a long story short, Montparnasse is a village that is as round as a circus. You get into it, you don't know just how, but getting out again is not so easy. So the next passage is from Ernest Hemingway's A Movable Feast, which was published posthumously in 1964, not 46, but recounts his time here in the 1920s. It was when we had come back from Canada and were living in the Rue Notre-Dame-des-Champs, and Miss Stein and I were still good friends, that Miss Stein made the remark about the lost generation. She had some ignition trouble with the old Model T Ford she then drove, and the young man who worked in the garage and had served in the last year of the war had not been adept, or perhaps had not broken the priority of other vehicles in repairing Miss Stein's Ford. Anyway, he had not been sérieux and had been corrected severely by the patron of the garage after Miss Stein's protest. The patron had said to him, "You are all a génération perdue." That's what you are. That's what you all are, Miss Stein said. All of you young people who served in the war, you are a lost generation. Really? I said. You are, she hesitated. You have no respect for anything. You drink yourself to death. Was the young mechanic drunk? I asked. Of course not. Have you ever seen me drunk? No, but your friends are drunk. I've been drunk, I said, but I don't come here drunk. Of course not. I didn't say that. The boy's patron was probably drunk by 11 o'clock in the morning, I said. That's why he makes such lovely phrases. Don't argue with me, Hemingway, Miss Stein said. It does no good at all. You are all a lost generation, exactly as the garage keeper said. Later, when I wrote my first novel, I tried to balance Miss Stein's quotation from the garage keeper with one from Ecclesiastes. But that night, walking home, I thought about the boy in the garage and if he had ever been hauled in one of those vehicles when they were converted into ambulances. I remembered how they used to burn out their brakes going down the mountain roads with a full load of wounded and braking in slow and finally using the reverse. and how the last ones were driven over the mountains empty, so they could be replaced by big Fiats with a good F-shift and metal-to-metal brakes. I thought of Miss Stein and Sherwood Anderson, and egotism and mental laziness versus discipline. I thought, who is calling who a lost generation? Then, as I was getting up to the Closerie des Lilas, with the light of on my old friend, the statue of Marshal Ney. With his sword out in the shadows of the trees on the bronze, he alone there and nobody behind him, and what a fiasco he'd made of Waterloo. I thought that all generations were lost by something, and always had been and always would be. And I stopped at the Lilas to keep the statue company and drink a cold beer before going home to the flat over the sawmill. But sitting there with the beer, watching the statue and remembering how many days Ney had fought personally, with the rear guard on the retreat from Moscow that Napoleon had ridden away from in the coach with Caulaincourt, I thought of what a warm and affectionate friend Miss Stein had been, and how beautifully she'd spoken of Apollinaire and of his death on the day of the armistice in 1918, with the crowd shouting, "Ah bas Guillaume!" and Apollinaire in his delirium thinking they were crying against him. And I thought, I will do my best to serve her and see she gets justice for the good work that she has done as long as I can, so help me God and Mike Ney. But the hell with her lost generation talk and all the dirty, easy labels. When I got home and into the courtyard and upstairs and saw my wife and my son and his cat, F-Puss, all of them happy and a fire in the fireplace, I said to my wife, you know, Gertrude is nice anyway. Of course, Tati, but she does talk a lot of rot sometimes. So the last little excerpt is also from A Movable Feast, and it's kind of a little reminiscent piece that I think is great to end on. According to Ernest Hemingway, if you are lucky enough to have lived in Paris as a young man, then wherever you go for the rest of your life, it stays with you. For Paris is a movable feast. There's never any ending to Paris, and the memory of each person who has lived in it differs from that of any other. We always return to it, no matter who we were, nor how it had changed, nor with what difficulties, nor what ease it could be reached. It was always worth it, and we received a return from whatever we brought to it.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to say quickly that as a former fellow, it's a joy to be back here at the Institute, and an honor to be here also at this inauguration and to help inaugurate. His body heavy from having woken up so early, Krishan was sitting on his haunches, leaning back against one of the tall iron posts that rose from the platform, watching the people around him with the dense, trance-like clarity that often takes hold when one is up before the day, when everything outside is still shrouded in the pitch-black darkness that directly precedes dawn. The train, which was scheduled for 5:15, had not yet arrived, and the platform had filled up with people, with middle-aged men, older couples, and families sitting or standing in the cool darkness of the morning, gazing out in silence at the trains arriving and departing on the other tracks. He was watching a family of 5 who had stopped not far from where he was sitting, standing in a circle near the edge of the platform around 3 large pieces of luggage. The mother and father were looking around the station with quiet but focused curiosity, as if they might be called upon to draw the scene from memory later on. The 3 teenage children, 2 girls and a boy, leaning on the bags with seeming indifference, lost in the dim blue glow of their phones. The parents looked like they might still live in the country, but it was obvious from the appearance of the children that the family was visiting from abroad. Their foreignness, like that of many diasporic children, immediately recognizable by the clothes they wore, their tight branded shirts and tank tops, their loose tracksuits and form-fitting jeans. I should say that this is set in Sri Lanka. On another day, Krishan might have tried to speculate about the family's origins and the circumstances under which they had left, studying how the parents were dressed, whether the children spoke Tamil or the language of their adopted home, how nervous or at ease they seemed to be returning to their place of origin. Today, though, he simply gazed at them without curiosity, not in the mood to analyze or conjecture, content to give sensation precedence over thought as he sat there waiting for the train. He'd been in a strange mood over the last day and a half, distracted and somewhat removed from himself, unable to shed any tears since his walk on Friday evening, unable for any sustained period of time to think about Rani, who'd once more begun to seem distant and elusive in his mind. He told his mother the news on returning home from his walk, and they decided it was best not to inform Appamma till the next morning, so she wouldn't have to spend the night reflecting on the death by herself. In retreating to his room, he'd spent the rest of the evening trying to read, his thoughts drifting now and then to the email he'd received from Anjum, the question of how to respond. When they told Appamma after breakfast the next morning, she hadn't been as shocked or upset as they'd expected, responding with surprise as she asked for all the details and then falling silent as the information sank in. She was sad, but her sadness was muted, calmer and more thoughtful than they'd expected the night before. Shrugging her shoulders, her eyes watering slightly and a kind of wistful smile on her face, she told them that Rani had suffered a lot, poor woman, that maybe it was for the best that she was gone. She'd been silent for a while and then asked his mother to take out 20,000 rupees from her bank account to be given to Rani's daughter to help with expenses for the funeral. It was money Krishan didn't know his grandmother had, money she'd apparently saved up over the years from her monthly pension payments, modest sums she'd received because her husband had been a teacher in their village in Jaffna. He'd been surprised to learn Appamma had a bank account, that she was actively keeping track of the money she received, had been even more surprised at the generosity of the gesture, given the childish self-absorption he'd come to associate with her old age. He'd known his grandmother was close to Rani, that the two of them had spent nearly every day together for almost 2 years, but the majority of their relationship had taken place while he was elsewhere, it made him realize, while he was busy with other things. And listening to his grandmother reminisce about Rani at various points over the previous day, he could tell, despite her measured response, that the two of them had been intimate in ways he had no inkling of. The platform began to resound beneath his feet, lightly at first and then more heavily, and looking to the right, Krishan saw that their train was approaching the platform slowly from the distance. The exterior was a dull red that had been stained over the years by rust, smoke, and grease. Not one of the sleek new models bought recently with loans from China, but one of the older, heavier, boxier trains purchased decades before from India. Everyone who'd been sitting and standing as if half asleep immediately clutched their bags and began hurrying in search of their carriages, roused by the thick smell of diesel. But Krishan remained where he was, watching as the family from abroad began making its way through the crowd, the three children listlessly following their parents toward the front of the train. He waited till they disappeared into the crowd, then standing up slowly and throwing his backpack over his shoulder, proceeded to the second-class carriage where his own seat had been booked. He climbed the vertical steps up to the carriage and, squinting in the harsh fluorescent light of the compartment, made his way to his seat, which he discovered, to his satisfaction, was by the window. The boy in his early 20s sitting next to him smiled and stood up to let him into his seat, probably Sinhalese from the look of him, which meant, Krishan noted happily, that he would probably be getting off somewhere in the south, that there was a chance the seat beside his would be empty for the remaining portion of the journey. Resting his bag on his lap, he sat down and looked out at the now much emptier platform, listened to the calls of men who went up and down the platform selling tea, coffee, and peanuts to passengers through the windows. He wondered whether he should try to sleep, since he'd only gotten 3 or 4 hours that night, but decided he would try to stay up despite his fatigue, to preserve for as long as possible the calm focus that had held his mind since waking. He took out of his bag the book he'd brought, a book about Indian militarism and the occupation of Kashmir that he'd wanted to read for some time, but had been struggling to make progress with in the previous few weeks. He flicked through the pages thoughtlessly, more to hear the sound of the flicking than to find the place he had stopped, till a heavy clanging sounded from deep inside the train and caused the carriage to shake, the familiar yet always surprising sound that signified the train's imminent departure and came, he liked to assume, from the massive pressure of the brakes being released. The train jerked forward a little bit, hesitated a few seconds, then began to stagger forward. The fluorescent lights in the carriage went off, shrouding everything in the blue darkness of dawn, and grateful that reading was no longer a possibility, Krishan put down the book and leaned back as the train made its way out of the station. The thin floor reverberated beneath his feet, and the glass windows trembled against their frames. the clanging of the wheels against the tracks growing heavier and more rhythmic as the train picked up speed. It was his first time traveling all the way north by train and looking out at the abandoned carriages and cluttered workshops just outside the station, at the shanty settlements strung out along both sides of the tracks, strangely desolate in the small, bright circles of light cast by occasional lamps. He began to feel, despite his fatigue and the somber purpose of his journey, a mood of anticipation rising gently inside him. The same sense of possibility he'd always felt when embarking on long train journeys, the sense that he was leaving behind everything that had limited and constrained him, moving towards some vast and unspecifiable future. It had been some years since he'd felt this mood of optimism while traveling, for though Krishan had traveled frequently between north and south during his time in the northeast, he'd always traveled by bus on these journeys. The train hadn't been functional till the previous year, the northern section having been destroyed during the war, and bus in any case was the more utilitarian option, faster, cheaper, and more easily arranged at the last minute than train. There was something much more stressful about traveling by bus, Krishan felt. For traveling out of Colombo by road, you were constantly blocked or impeded by traffic, especially in buses because of their unwieldy size and the narrowness of the roads. Bus drivers were so often in a state of physical tension, their hands tightly clutching the steering wheel and gear stick, their feet constantly pushing down on the pedals, suddenly accelerating and braking in the pointless attempt to overtake slow vehicles, attempts born out of a deep anxiety to finish their routes as soon as possible, despite the fact that it was impossible, no matter how quickly they went, to speed up even the longest journey by a meaningful amount of time. The constant frustration of the drivers, which invariably communicated itself to the passengers too, seemed only to make them tenser, to spur them on more recklessly, pushing them to overtake on bends and when vehicles were approaching on the opposite lane, a frustration that was no doubt one of the major causes of the road accidents that took place around the country each day. They spent the majority of their lives in such a state, Krishan guessed, and imagining these drivers as they lay awake in their beds at night, their bodies still caught up in the tension and strain of the day's driving, he wondered sometimes what their dreams were like when they were finally able to fall asleep. Whether they saw visions of broad, empty, smoothly tarred roads unlike the ones they came across in real life, roads that stretched out into the horizon and down which they could accelerate into infinity, endlessly and without obstacle, as long as they pleased. Traveling by train was different, for even if there were occasional delays and breakdowns, there was never any traffic on train rides, no effort or strain required as you were borne smoothly and inexorably toward your goal. Looking out at the silhouettes of the city passing by in the darkness, Krishan thought of all the hours he'd spent on trains during his time in India when he was on holiday from university and had the chance to leave Delhi to see other parts of that vast, seemingly endless country. He'd spent most of those journeys sitting or lying on his seat or berth, reading, listening to music, or simply looking out at the small, unpeopled rural stations, the hot wind rushing into the carriage through the open doors and windows, allowing him to breathe in the air of the places they passed and absorb their smells, as if he were in some kind of communion with these small towns and villages as they flitted by. The constant movement of wind through the carriages would feel like a calling to him from outside, and leaving his seat, he would go down every so often to the linking section between carriages, where standing in a corner, he would look to make sure nobody was watching, light himself a cigarette, and pull open one of the heavy train doors, one hand tightly clasping the grip on the door frame so he didn't fall into the passing landscape, the other holding the cigarette in front of his body so that no one passing behind would see that he was smoking. The warm, fragrant air of the countryside buffeting his face, he would look out at the wide expanses of farmland, brush, and forest, at the plains that went by for sometimes hours at a stretch without stopping, and he felt, at such moments, something close to a sense of liberation. If not quite liberation, then the sense at least of being on the verge of liberation. It was as if, at such times, he was permanently suspended in the blissful but always vanishing space between desire and satisfaction. In that region of the surf where one is no longer anguished by the absence of something one feels to be necessary for one's salvation, but not yet saddened by the disappointment that the attainment of desire always seemed to bring. For strong desire that radiates out through all the regions of the body, always seemed to involve the hope or belief that the attainment of the object of desire, whether a person, place, or situation, will change everything completely, will end all absence and yearning, all effort and struggle, that it will stem somehow the slow, sad passage of time. We experience, while still young, our most thoroughly felt desires as a kind of horizon. See, life is divided into what lies on this side of the horizon and what lies on the other, as if we only had to reach that horizon and fall into it in order for everything to change, in order to once and for all transcend the world as we've known it, though in the end, of course, this transcendence never actually comes. a fact one began to appreciate only as one got older, when one realized there was always more life on the other side of desire's completion, that there was always waking up, working, eating, and sleeping, the slow passing of time that never ends, when one realized that one can never truly touch the horizon because life always goes on, because each moment bleeds into the next, and whatever one considered the horizon of one's life turns out always to be yet another piece of earth.
really, you all were sublime. that we've been in this non-HVAC room, please let's go out into the garden and enjoy another cocktail dînatoire.